Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Now and forever.
Saint Elizabeth, Protectress of the Franciscan Third Order, was born in 1207. Her father was Andrew II, King of Hungary. At a very early age, her marriage to Louis, son of the Landgrave of Thuringia, was arranged, so that the princess was only 4 when she was accompanied to Thuringia to grow up in the court of her future husband, 7 years her elder. Already as a child, she showed remarkable piety. Instead of taking part in worldly conversations, she preferred to spend her time in the chapel. Her thoughts, words, and actions were all constantly directed toward the Lord. Unlike the ladies of the court, she did not want to wear in the chapel either gloves or embroidered cloaks according to the fashion of the time. She wanted rather to humble herself before the Lord. She preferred the company of servants and beggars to that of nobles, and gave in alms as much as she possibly could. In 1216, Louis's elder brother died, making him the heir. This made it more important who he would marry. His wife would be the lady of the castle, and would therefore set an example for the other ladies of the court. If she didn't wear jewelry and fine clothing in the chapel, none of the other ladies could either. Louis's mother and sister tried to persuade him to choose another bride. They said that Elizabeth was not made for the court, but for the cloister, that is, for the monastery. But as the Second Vatican Council reminds us, holiness is not just for monks and nuns. We are all called to holiness. Louis knew he had a rare treasure in his future bride, and he would never give it up. As the Book of Sirach says, a good wife is a generous gift, bestowed upon him who fears the Lord. Choicest of blessings is a modest wife. A holy and decent woman adds grace upon grace. Indeed, no price is worthy of her temperate soul. In 1217, Louis's father died, making him the Landgrave at 16. I think his mother ruled as regent until he came of age. When he was 20 and Elizabeth was 14, he married her. Women married young in those days. Her first son, Herman, was born the following spring. He was named after Louis's father. 2 years later, she had a daughter named Sophie after Louis's mother. Meanwhile, Elizabeth would be a mother to all the needy, or wanted to be a mother to all the needy in the territories under her husband's jurisdiction. With her handmaids Guda and Eisentrud, she came down from Wartburg Castle, humbly dressed, to visit the poor and sick, to succor widows, orphans, and prisoners. She built a hospital next to the castle so that she could serve the poor and the sick. On Maundy Thursday, she had 12 lepers go up to the castle to wash and kiss their feet, and she gave each one a silver coin, a tunic, and a loaf of white bread. Louis supported what his wise bride was doing, although his mother and sister were hostile to her. In 1223, between the birth of her first 2 children, the Franciscans arrived in Thuringia. St. Elizabeth loved gospel property and had a friary built for them in Eisenach, the capital. One of the friars, named Rudiger, became her spiritual director, and with her husband's permission she entered the Third Order. She showed herself so zealous in the practice of the rule that St. Francis rewarded her by sending her as a gift a cloak that he had worn, together with a letter. On a political level, there was a running conflict between the Landgraves of Thuringia and the bishops of Mainz, who also governed a territory. Louis's father had died excommunicated by the bishop, and the conflict still continued. When in 1223, Pope Honorius III invited Louis to take the cross, that is, to join a crusade, this offered multiple advantages. First of all, the objective of freeing the holy places attracted a holy man like Louis. But in addition, while he was a crusader, his lands would be under papal authority and guaranteed by the Pope. So the Bishop of Mainz would have to stop encroaching on what Louis considered his rights. In June of the next year, a couple of months after the birth of his first daughter, he took the cross and began making preparations to go on crusade. Meanwhile, miracles were happening around his wife. Just when he thought that she might be going too far, a miracle would happen to show that heaven approved. One day, while Louis was away, St. Elizabeth was caring for a leper who was in terrible condition. She washed him and put him into her husband's bed. Louis unexpectedly came home, and those who disapproved of his wife's charity were only too happy to tell him immediately what she had done. Irritated, he ran into his bedroom and pulled back the curtain around the bed. There was indeed a man lying there, but the leprosy had disappeared. A soft light shone about his brow, and his face had a majesty beyond words. He was lying on a cross with his hands and feet nailed to it. He was that leper whom the prophet had seen in a vision, loaded with the sins of mankind, the eternal Son of the Father, who had said, "You did it, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." Louis IV of Thuringia was left speechless and conceived a new idea of the holiness of his bride. In 1226, Louis had to follow Emperor Frederick II south into Italy on a military expedition. Around the same time, Louis found a new spiritual director for his wife, Conrad of Marburg, a preacher who was being sent around to reform monasteries. She was pregnant with their third child when he left for Italy. During his absence, a terrible famine raged in Thuringia for 2 years. Elizabeth then became the merciful mother of her starving people, to whom she distributed the grain from the castle's stores and 64,000 scudi of gold from its coffers. That's about 470 pounds of gold. Every day 1,000 poor people went up to the castle to receive bread and clothing from the hands of the Holy Landgrave. At harvest time she would gather the indigent who were able to work, provide them with work clothes, shoes, and a scythe, and send them out to harvest grain. She went so far as to give away in charity the proceeds of her husband's 4 principalities, and to sell valuables and precious garments to distribute the price to the poor. Meanwhile, Louis, stricken with fever at Otranto, died there on September 11, 1227, having instructed his 2 knights to bring his ring to his wife, who was expecting their 3rd child. It was a 9/11 that changed St. Elizabeth's life. Certain courtiers very hostile to her persuaded her brothers-in-law, Henry, Raspe, and Conrad, to usurp the rights of her son, Herman, the legitimate heir. According to Louis's will, St. Elizabeth was supposed to be the regent of her son until he came of age, and Herman was just 5. But with the excuse that she had squandered the realm's property, Elizabeth was thrown out onto the streets along with her 3 young children. Only her 2 handmaids accompanied her. Citizens were threatened with banishment if they gave her hospitality, so the only one who took her in was an innkeeper who, in order to not risk being banished, allowed her just to be sheltered from the winter weather in his pigsty. But here we see the greatness of her spirit. As she contemplated the scene, she realized that she was reliving the experience of the Holy Family in Bethlehem. And when at midnight the Franciscans rang their church bells for night prayer, the princess went there to ask them to sing the Te Deum in thanksgiving for the tribulations. But others stood up for her rights. When the knights returned in 1228 from Otranto, carrying Louis's remains, they were outraged at the way the Landgrave had been treated. And when the King of Hungary heard how his daughter had been treated, he wasn't very happy either. So the hard time came to an end, and she could return to live in a castle. In fact, not just in that castle, because Emperor Frederick II wanted to marry this woman. But St. Elizabeth, while her husband was still alive, had made a vow of perfect continence in the event that she became a widow, that is, a vow to never remarry. Having experienced poverty, she also wanted to live in poverty. But she was obliged to take her dowry back because it was her right, and there were others defending her rights. So she spent her dowry by building a hospital at Marburg, where she had followed Conrad. Into it she gathered the poor and abandoned, and served them with her own hands. Conrad was a very demanding spiritual director who made her give up her children. The littlest was her daughter, who was just 2 years old when she was entrusted to Norbertine canonesses. Her name was Gertrude, and she grew up to become the abbess and is venerated as a blessed. After a few years of her life of prayer, poverty, and service to the needy, she died at the age of 24. Her last words were, "Behold, the hour is at hand in which the Virgin gave birth." Thus she was born to eternal life on November 17th, 1931, having given sublime examples of virtue in every state of life, as a virgin, a bride, and a widow. Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Now